Hello everyone, and welcome to this InfraNodus webinar where I'm going to look at the use cases that were sent by the users. We will just take a few moments to wait until the other participants join in. In the meanwhile, feel free to explore the tools that you have. So for example, the Q&A section here, where you can ask questions and submit any of the topics you would like me to explore today. And also feel free to suggest some of the research topics that you might be interested for us to work on today as well. Just for you to know, I asked the participants of the webinar to submit what they're interested in at the moment and what kind of insight they would like to have about this data. Because this time I wanted to do it not in the way where I explain some of the features, but rather where I work on some use cases. So I will just go through each of them step by step, starting from the first one I received to the last one. Some people didn't submit anything, some people submitted something, so we will be exploring the features of InfraNodus that allow the users to find out information that they're interested in. I will be looking at your questions, so if you have something that you would like to ask in the meanwhile, let me know. And I think we will begin right now. So the first request I received was a request from Julio, and they wanted to know about text analytics. And what they were interested in relation to that was the relationship between different speech. So I guess it's the relationship between different languages. So I will show you now how you can use InfraNodus to explore general discourse around that subject. First of all, I would go and I would start with the Google app here and type in the search query I'm interested in. So for example, here it's text analytics. Click go. What's going to happen is that the top search results from Google will be visualized as a graph where the words are the nodes and the co-occurrences are the connections between them. So like this, we can easily find out relations between different terms, which are the most prominent ones, how they're connected, what are the most influential topics, and so on. In the meanwhile, I will also show you some of the new features in InfraNodus analytics panel that allow you to explore any kind of discourse very quickly. So first here we look at the text analytics visualization graph. The first thing in the workflow to do is to actually remove the search terms, which the software does automatically. You can see them at the right top corner here, because it's quite obvious that they will be quite prominent if we were to get them back into the graph. So this is why those two, you see, they're removed. And this is a good first thing to do with any research you do. And then you can look at the graph, see what's happening. So the nodes that have more influence in this discourse in the context of Google search results are shown bigger on the graph. Here we see that sentiment analysis is quite an important topic. We have mining, we have natural language. If we click on the nodes, we can see in which context they're used. So this can be interesting to get an overview of a discourse. You also have this information here on the right in the analytics pane. You have the most influential elements, analysis, mining, data, language, sentiment, and you have the main topics which exist. I added some new features, so here if you click on the plus you can see all the topics that are detected in the document, and here if you click on that plus you can see the top 50 influential words. You can also download them if you click here, and if you click on the help button, you can learn more about each of them. So here, to come back to this example, we have 4 different topics unstructured data analysis. So this is something that I understand that text analytics is about analyzing unstructured data. Okay, then mining science. So what is it about? Text mining. Yeah, exactly. So text mining in the context of science. Also customer insight feedback. So getting insight into customer feedback. This is another cluster of results where people are interested in that. And natural language learning. So we have these 4 topics, the most influential elements. The next thing that can be quite interesting to do is to use this new button here called Reveal Non-Obvious. So we're kind of hiding behind the topics which seem obvious. So for example, here you see that analysis, mining, data, language, sentiment. This is quite obvious for us that it's going to be relevant in this discourse. So what we do is that we remove those words. This is what happens. They're added here into the stop words. So you can see what's happening behind those. Yeah. Here you see the new topics that emerge. Unstructured customer data, okay, science learning, machine learning. So for example, this is something that we didn't see before, but we discovered this topic through that. And for instance, let's say that we want to stop here and we want to analyze what exists out there on machine learning and on all the terms that we looked at. So when I select those 2 terms, like you can see here on the graph, they're automatically added here together with everything that was selected before. So we can make this very precise search query on Google and add the graph for this new query into the general visualization of all the topics. Like this, we can explore a little bit more this subject. So you can keep on adding stuff to explore this particular subject. So for example, natural language processing. Okay, I know it already exists there, so I delete it from the graph. Okay, computational, learn, Oracle machine learning. So I discovered that Oracle has a product in that direction. Python, so using Python also to fetch data. This is something also that exists in this discourse, and so on. So this would be the workflow that I would use to explore this particular topic. I will now go and look at another suggestion that we received. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions about what we just did, let me know. So let's switch to the next one. There was a question from Ronald. Tips on how to add remove nodes to detect patterns between main topical groups. And also what he asked was how to present this in a report to provide proof of your findings. So this is an interesting question. Basically, I just showed you how you can add and remove nodes. Basically use the same workflow. You visualize the graph, then you make the first reading, and then you start removing the things that are more or less obvious to you to kind of get to the deeper topics that are hiding underneath the obvious stuff. And this button here, it's a new one. It just removes the most influential elements from the graph, so you can see what's happening behind them. And a nice way to present it, I mean, it depends on what purpose you have. If you just want something appealing visually, then you can export it as a PNG. You have the button here at the bottom right corner. You can also actually export all the bigrams. So this is more like statistical information, depending on, you know, what you actually want to do with this data and how you want to present it. Also, if you need some scientific background, there is a section here of how it works on the main page of InfraNodus, and here is a reference to the white paper which describes the algorithm. So if you're in the context of research, for instance, then this could be an interesting thing for you to include in the report. Okay, I'm going to go and answer some questions that people are asking. So one of them is from Ben. Could you explain contagion potential? Yeah, basically, this is a measure which is based on that measure of network structure. And the way that it works and the assumptions it makes, it's going to take me a minute to explain because there's quite a few parameters inside. But basically, what happens every time we build in like a graph in InfraNodus is that the network structure is being calculated. And there is a modularity score, which is also being calculated. This modularity score is produced by community detection algorithm. And the higher it is, the more modular the network is. So this is one parameter which is taken into account for network structure to show how diversified or how connected it is. It's the modularity structure. The higher it is, the more diversified or even dispersed the network is. The lower it is, then we have a setting like focused or biased, so it means it's really interconnected. But this is not the only parameter it takes into account. There is also the distribution of influence. So basically it means how influential nodes are distributed among different communities. So for example, the higher this number is, the more they are distributed. The less it is, then the more concentrated is a group of influential words in one community. So basically we also take this into account and we try to see how distributed the influence is among the different communities. If they're all concentrated, if all the influential nodes are concentrated in only one community, it means there is a bias towards one of them, so it means that there is too much influence in one community. If it's distributed evenly among several, like we can see here, then it's going to be more dispersed. Once we take all these measures into account, then we calculate the network structure index here. If you click on the question mark, you can also explore what it means. You can also see more statistics which is taken into account. And basically this contagion potential is a reflection of that. And what it does, it comes from immunology and from the studies on the structure of the networks that are more prone to propagation. So for example, if you do like a quick overview of studies on the subject, you will see, and it's quite obvious also, that the more interconnected the network is, the easier it is to propagate information or disease through it, for example. The more dispersed it is, the harder it is for things to propagate. However, there are also some features in the structure of the network that might make your network more prone to being infiltrated or less. So you kind of take all these measures into account and calculate the potential for this network to propagate information. So this is why it's called contagion potential. And basically in this context, if you also, I think, hover here, it shows you what are the possible options. And basically in this case it means medium, so it means that information propagates quite well through it actually. You might also have a really low potential, which means that if you see this network as a discursive field, that information will find it hard to travel through it. If it's really high potential, it means that anything that you come into this discourse, if it's touching upon the important concepts in this discourse, is going to propagate pretty well. So this is how it works. I hope it answers the question. Then David asked, he's interested in the ability to embed the graph in a read-only format online. Yes, in fact, you can do this. So let's say if I wanted to do this with the graph, I just go here. I make it public first because by default it's private. It says here now it's public. And you have both an iframe embed here, so you can embed this into your website, or you can also just use a link. And then when you open this link in a private session, you would be able to see this graph with all the parameters which you saved. And it also has info which says where the data was imported from here. This is how it works. Okay, we will move on to the next questions now. I will just read through them. Sentiment and auto recognition and meanings expressed with different terms. Okay, I mean, it's quite general, but basically the process that you follow is the same. I will demonstrate how it works using some of the next examples if they're more specific, because it will be maybe more interesting to look into some more specific stuff. So for example, Suzanne here wrote the use of narratives of humiliation, fomenting conflict, signaling victory. So the best thing in this case is if you also send me some examples of those narratives, right? Because right now, the only data that I have is, for instance, I can go into the Google app and import Google search results again for this query. I can also import something from Twitter. But in this case, it's also nice to have some abstracts of text, so maybe some text that you wrote, and to use them to visualize. Maybe one interesting thing that I can demonstrate to you, because I see in this question there is I think there is a question of how a narrative evolves also, and that can be quite interesting to see. And I want to show you a new feature which was implemented recently. It's better to show it on something that is chronological, so I will do a Twitter import. I will use the word humiliation. Why not? Let's see what people are tweeting about this subject. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is a new feature. It's not yet fully implemented, but I'm just going to do it through this. It's going to make its way soon into the interface. And basically, what it allows you to do is if you click on this timer here, then you can see how the discourse evolved in time. So here we have tweets from the oldest to the newest. And when we scroll, then we can see how the discourse was forming over time. You see, so we can see how the tweets were appearing, what people were talking about. So now they're talking about American morning dye, then India video, then Muslim subject, and then you can gradually see how the whole network builds up. So for instance, let's say you have some text or a set of texts about humiliation, and you would like to see how the discourse evolves. This is a function to use, and soon some of the statistics about the dynamics will make its way into the trends. Right now you see the emerging topics only, so this is the topics that tend to emerge in the most recent tweets in this context, but we will be adding some of the dynamic graph features. David is asking, does InfraNodus support non-English text analysis today? If yes, which languages? If not, when is it expected to do so? Yes, it supports several languages. When you go to settings here, you have English. So basically, by default, it's actually detected automatically. But if you work with only one language, I recommend you to switch the setting here. So it can work really well with English, Russian, French, and German. And by really well, I mean that the lemmatization library is pretty good. So basically, when you change the words, word roots, it's going to bring them to the original shape. So for example, taken becomes take, took also becomes take, and so on. So you need some special dictionaries for that. It also has Portuguese, Spanish, Swedish. David is writing that he wants Italian. I hear you. I'm going to look for an Italian module. If it exists, I'm going to add it because this is a pretty easy thing to do if there is a suitable module for that. The timeline I can give you is maybe about 1 or 2 weeks, you know, because if it exists, it's pretty easy to implement it. If not, it's going to be a bit more difficult. By the way, using this opportunity, I want to also show you the new support portal we have here. It automatically loads when you open the apps page, or you can also open it here if you click the manual. There is a lot of data. It's going to show the internal one now, so I'm just going to open this in a private window. And what it has is basically all the information you need about using InfraNodus. There is a forum. There are some step-by-step guides, case studies with videos. So for example, right now there is one on text mining and sentiment analysis. So I recommend you to take a look at it because you might find out some interesting ways to work with the graphs and with information. Okay, so let's continue to the questions we had so far. I'm just going to go through them. Feel free to also ask in the chat as well, or in the Q&A. I actually see a new one from an anonymous attendee. If I keep adding in searching topics and at some point I want to go back to a previous version, how do I do that? Right, so let's say you've been adding, I'm not exactly sure actually what you mean by that, but for example, if you mean selecting stuff here, doing some manipulation with the graph, you can always go back if you click this button to the original shape. Also, if you click here, reveal non-obvious, and you can always click this button to come back to the original graph. Maybe you mean something else. Maybe you mean, let's say I made this visualization and then I add more information here and I add more data into the graph. In this case, your old graph is overwritten. So a good thing to do is to basically keep this graph and make a copy and to continue building on top of the new one, so you don't erase the old one. But actually at the same time, the feature of saving states is something we're working on, so hopefully soon you will be able to save the state of the graph. So for example, you imported something now, you want to have it exactly that way, no matter what you do, you save the state and then you will be able to come back anytime you want. So this is something that is going to be built in. Hope this answers your question. Ben is asking, is there a way to do a search where multiple words stay together as one such term? For example, Navajo Nation should be seen as a unified term. Hand washing, yeah. So basically a way to unify nodes. So you have a way to do this right now where you can use hashtags for that. So for example, I can do it like this. Let's say Navajo Nation is a unified term. So you see, it will be processed as one thing. If you use normal words at the same time, you should go to settings and go to the hashtags and say that you want to use both hashtags and words. So you select this, save, and then you're able to use hashtags on some parts of text to have them processed as single nodes. This is, I think it's not completely what you want, because you also want to be able to select some nodes and, for example, to say that, okay, these are, let's say, like, I don't know, curfew and lockdown synonyms, so you want them to be treated as one node. It's not yet possible, but it's something that is in the list of the features to add. I cannot give you a timeline at the moment on that, but if you think it's important, please submit it to the support portal as the requested feature, and it's going to go higher up in the priority. So Vaya is asking, she's asking about, or he's asking about structural gaps. Structural gaps is something very interesting to explore. Actually, there has been some new additions recently. So I'm going to show you the graph with the tweeter, and we'll try to use it on that. I'm going to bring it to the original shape, and then I go into the Insight tab. And what it does here is that it shows me a structural gap. A structural gap, I can actually click reveal the gap so it becomes visually clear. It looks for the two topics or the communities inside the graph that could be connected better, but are not fully connected. So they might be connected, but not so well. And then it detects a gap in the network based on this information, based on this structural insight, to recommend which parts of text you could link together to generate new ideas. So this is very interesting when you do research or when you want to explore a certain discourse and you want to know what would be an interesting, valuable contribution into that discourse. This can be a really useful tool to use. In this case, for instance, let's say, I think this was a search about language analysis. I don't remember anymore what was this. I think it was about text analysis, exactly, or text analytics. So for example, if I delete these two terms and then I look at the structural gap, I will see that it proposes me to connect these two different clusters of nodes. And here it shows me on the left the statements with the highest concentration of those separate topics. One is the text analytics and machine learning. So it's language processing, natural language processing, machine learning, okay. And then a tool for customer engagement, insights from text-based customer engagement. So basically one tool is about analyzing customer data to understand some patterns. Another community is about the tool, which is, or about the approach to text analytics using machine learning. So we could say that we could contribute in a way that could be interesting for everyone involved into this discourse if we create content that would link these two topics together. So for example, how we can use natural language learning to process customer data. It doesn't mean that this information doesn't exist, but it means that in Google search results for this query, it was not very much present. So if we add it into this discourse, then we could introduce something that could be interesting for people. So let's move on to more questions or the requests of the participants. Biomedical applications, Nikolaus is asking. So maybe it would be nice, Nikolaus, if you just elaborate a little bit in the chat if you are now joining the webinar, if you elaborate a little bit what you wanted to know about it, because I could of course do a Google search on that, but maybe you have some specific interest in this subject that you want to explore. Please let me know. Graph applications on radio mics. Okay, so what I can do is to, okay, AI in medical imaging. Okay, great. So let's say, and can you please write to me what you would like to explore about this? Like, do you have some data source in mind, or you would just like to know what's happening generally in the field, or what you would like to know? Because okay, so like a general overview of the field, I guess. And also I see that you asked something about SEO, search engine optimization. So also maybe how you could create content that could be relevant in this field, right? So this is interesting. I can demonstrate to you all a really interesting feature which is used normally by search engine optimization people, marketing people, when they want to know what content to create. And I will demonstrate it to you using this example. And David, yes, the recording will be made available after. I'm going to send email to everyone so you can see the beginning. And I'm also always adding time codes so you don't have to watch the whole thing, but only the things that are interesting for you. Okay, so let's get back to James, to Nicolaus' question, actually. Medical imaging. Okay. And I will at the same time answer also the question of James, who asked how to use InfraNodus to write the best possible content on a given topic. I guess James is also involved into SEO work because he also asked how to use it in SEO. So I'm going to show how it works using these two examples. Let's suppose that we take this as a use case. We are interested in the topic of medical imaging. And we want to know what kind of content, what discourse exists on this subject at the moment. When I use the SEO application, it's available on the front page of SEO. What it does is that it creates a very interesting thing. On the one side, it visualizes a graph of the Google search results for this query. So here you can see them here. This is what people find when they search for medical imaging. They find things about radiology service. You can click and see what exactly they find. Program, technology. You have the topics here and the analytics panel. All of the things that people find. And then it visualizes the second graph of what people search for. This is what they search for when they search for this query. So they look for, let's say if we click here, they look for a degree in radiology, but also in diagnostic, medical imaging, and so on. Okay, and then an interesting feature here is to compare the two graphs. So you compare what people find, the supply of information, with what people search for. And it subtracts one graph from the other. So you only see what people search for, so the demand, but what they don't find, the supply. And this is what you can see doesn't yet exist in the search results. There is something about salary, so people are definitely looking for jobs in this area, and also PDFs on medical imaging. So if you were to create content that could be interesting to the people who read, you could create presentations in PPT or in PDF, and also something about jobs. The rest is covered by Google search results that already exist. So then you can keep on adding new search results or queries to see how you could expand on this knowledge. But basically this would be the workflow. Maybe I'm going to demonstrate it in a little bit more detail a little bit later, but what I want to show, because Nicolaus also asked about AI in medical imaging. So for example, what you could do is to also AI medical imaging, add the queries here for this subject. It's a question if they exist, because sometimes there is not enough statistics. Yeah, actually they did exist. So it added some stuff on artificial intelligence. And now when we click on the missing keywords link, you see that we have some more interesting stuff here. Artificial intelligence in radiology. Okay, so to be fair to that, we also need to add search results for this query. So then we can see what's missing in search results relative to the queries that people use. In fact, almost everything exists. So again, PDFs is something that a lot of people miss. Impact. What about impact? artificial intelligence impact factor, the potential impact of artificial intelligence in radiology. So this would be two requests to cater to because people are searching for this, but they don't find, at least when they use the impact word, they don't find any information on the impact of artificial intelligence on that field. So that could be an interesting niche to explore. And basically you can use the same algorithm with any sort of data or any search queries you're interested in. I will continue answering James' question here on how to use InfraNodus to write the best possible content on a given topic, workflow and research, determining online structure, main topics should be, and then putting the article together, including CO. So, as I said, you can use this app, the CO app, but for instance, the way that I usually like to start is to first define actually what will be the kind of general direction, and then I would not start from thinking about the topics which should or should not exist. I would rather look first what exists out there already on the subject. So for example, let's say I wanted to create something interesting that would be relevant on text analysis. I can use this app to visualize one graph of Google search results on the subject, so what exists out there, and another graph of what people search for, so what they demand. And then it shows me the difference between the two. And maybe I start from looking at Google search results. So this gives me an overview that people are interested in text mining. If they're interested in text analysis, they're interested in text mining. Okay. They're interested in sentiment analysis. Okay, this is also quite clear. And also some kind of word tools. What is it? Also counting the number of words or word clouds. Okay, so this gives me a general idea of what they want. Then I can go into missing content field and look into the structural gap. So it's shown here, enrich the current discourse. I can click on those and see in which context they're used. So for example, in this case, it proposes me to think of a possible connection between word tool methods. Okay, so these tools to make word tools. This we can get rid of because it's October, it's Google search result. So here it's proposing if we get rid of October, software free research. So free software, free research, okay, language natural analysis. So maybe to create some content about natural language analysis, but free open source version, some kind of trial versions of something that could fulfill the existing gap in the content. So I would write this down, and I can even write it down here directly. I can say that, okay, create content or tools that provide free access to some basic natural language analysis. I add it here, and then you see it shows in gray what existing topics this statement covers. And I can keep on exploring stuff and memorizing them. So for example, I will also write that my text, it should include something on text mining, because I see that it's quite a prominent topic in this discourse. And also I remember there was something about sentiment analysis. So I can just click these two, add them here, and you see gradually I'm covering the existing graph with my ideas. When I cover the whole graph, it means that I have a good overview in my notes, and they will be all shown here. When I reload the graph, you see I have my notes here, which I took of all these ideas. Then the next step, I would see what people actually search for. I see here that they search for analysis tools. So they really are interested in tools. So this is something I should also save into my ideas. Analysis tools. You see now it's gray, it's selected. Data, software, qualitative data software analysis. Okay, let's save that also. So now I have all these extra ideas here. By the way, if sometimes you open something and it doesn't work because there is a bug, of course, we're working on that, but sometimes it happens, you just need to reload the page. So you can click this button, reload the graph, or also Apple R or Control R if you're on Windows. Just helps sometimes to work through some occasional problems with software. So this is basically it. We have a list of some inspirations for this topic. Just to remind you, we were looking at the strategies to create interesting content in a certain field, and we made a SEO app query on the subject text analysis to see what we could write about in relation to text analysis that could be interesting to other people. And we found out that if we write about text analysis, we should also write about tools that provide free access to some basic natural language analysis capabilities. We should write about text mining, analytics of sentiment, and qualitative analysis. So these are the keywords that we could use to create our content or to infiltrate this discourse. We could also use that word. Then what we can do is to go into the missing keywords here and see what else exists out there that people search for but they don't find. So PDFs, okay, so we know that if we make a PDF, it's probably going to be in demand. And also this NLTK text classification. So let's add it into ideas. Like this, we can add something about it. Download, PDF, example. So example, text analysis, text mining examples. So I guess this is something that students search for. So this we can also add as a note. And then in the keyword ideas here, we'll have this whole list of all the different content ideas that we created. And you can use it either for search engine optimization or for creating interesting content about this subject, or also if you're interested to see what a certain discourse is about and how you could contribute in an interesting and in a constructive way to this discourse, then this would be the way to do it. David is asking, how can InfraNodus assist in combating fake news and or bot-generated text? So at the moment, it doesn't have this capability very clearly, but what's interesting is to use the measure of discourse structure here. I might demonstrate to you actually something quite interesting that I discovered. It's part of an ongoing research, but for instance, when I search, let's say, I'll show you how we can import news. So let's say that we want to import news, and we want to import news from 4 different sources: The Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post, Financial Times, just as an example. Let's see what the news are writing about. As you can see here, almost all the content is focused on coronavirus. And before, a few days ago, a few weeks ago, it was even more concentrated, so you couldn't even see other nodes. It was all about coronavirus. So obviously in this case, the news are very biased towards one subject. So what InfraNodus can do is to show you how biased something is, but not in the sense that this word is used traditionally. So it's not going to identify whether it's subjective or objective, or whether it's towards the left wing or right wing. What it's going to show you is what the structure of the discourse is like. Is it very connected network and focused only on 1 or 2 concepts, and it just reiterates them all the time? So this is one category that it can identify. Or is the text really dispersed? Is it really talking about a lot of different topics at the same time, and then it has several points of view? To make it more readable to the users, we're going to implement it as a separate index. But for now, you can use the analysis to detect this sort of information, you know. And for example, here, if you click on coronavirus and you remove it from the graph, you can already see all the different other news that would not be maybe so visible before that. For example, here, and then you can click on the links and read them. But David, if you have any ideas based on what I said for how it could be used to combat fake news and bot-generated content, please let me know. Send me an email. I will, by the way, write my email here, and also a link to our new support portal. So you can also leave your requests there and even suggest some use cases for the knowledge base or for the forum. We will be very happy to promote your work also if you used InfraNodus, or even if you didn't use InfraNodus but you work with network analysis, please feel free to submit some interesting new posts and research that you create. Okay, let's go further into exploring what people were interested about. So someone was asking about COVID-19, information and misinformation, and vaccines. Again, you know, we could use, for example, for this purpose, Twitter import to see what people are talking about. COVID-19 vaccines. Let's see if there is anything interesting there. This shows us the most popular discourse at the moment on the social media about this subject. So here we see that people are talking about global access to public, to health needs. Okay, so people are saying that vaccines should be universally available. This is one part of the discourse on the subject. Another one is vaccinating children, and people are talking about that. Some people have concerns about safety. And some people are supporting the use of vaccines. Trial clinical developed 5 diseases, the most of this most influential nodes. We can go behind them a bit to see if there is any other information we find interesting. By the way, InfraNodus can also process emojis. So here we have planet Earth and some words used with it. Okay, so basically the general discourse on Twitter is not very critical. It's quite positive, and people are just looking for the different ways to explore all the implications of this subject, you know, and then you can start building upon this. So for example, you can choose another query, coronavirus vaccines, and see if there is anything extra in relation to this subject. So for example, if people use the word coronavirus, if there is anything else. What I found interesting, I saw recently a hashtag, and I just was curious if it's something that is popular or not, COVID-1984. And when I made a search for this, it actually showed me a lot of critical information about the vaccine part. So I think it also depends on how you do the search and what kind of keywords you use. But in general, we saw now that when people talk about the vaccine on Twitter, at least the majority of the tweets that make it to the list of the most popular ones are just curious about the implications of it. They're not critical about that. I will answer some questions in the Q&A. So Jean-Baptiste was asking about PDFs and CSV. Yes, CSV can be processed. You can go to the import app here. You choose a CSV file, and then it's going to appear here, and you can choose which columns you want to import and what kind of data you would like to actually extract from it. Normally, what I would recommend to do is to choose one column. So for example, it could be a CSV with the customer feedback, and one column contains all the customer feedback that you have. So you could get this information in and visualize a graph of what the customers are saying about a certain subject. But you could also import CSV with the links between different communities, let's say. So one column could be a from edge. Let's say it's a CSV of travel patterns. So one column is where people are traveling from, and another one is where people are traveling to, and then you could make connections between the nodes based on that. So that could also be something interesting to try. Tony Guthrie is asking, can you include Google Scholar results? Yes, we considered that, but they don't offer an API because of some legal issues. And we're looking for another academic search engine so people could include abstracts of papers related to certain subject. If you can think of any that could be interesting, please let me know. Anonymous attendee is asking, could you please demonstrate how to locate key ideas, words, topics that when people search for on Google but couldn't find the results for? This I already showed before, trying to find unsolved problems among consumers, which would help refocus resources of research. So basically, like I showed you, you use the SEO app, type in the search query you're interested in, and then open the missing content link, and you will be able to see. Massimo Conte is asking, how can I write text in dashboard if I have problem with CSV import? So basically, you can just copy and paste your whole Excel table actually into the dashboard. So for instance here, if I had any information, like I could just take all the questions that people asked, for instance, in the open Q&A. So I guess I'm not breaking anyone's privacy here. It's just the questions that people asked during the session. But if you copy and paste Excel table, it's going to be the same. It will automatically determine the rows and columns, and you just visualize it like that, you know. And I can then quickly see that people are asking about topics a lot, and they also are asking about finding unsolved problems. You know, so if you import your own data, then you will be able to have the same results if for some reason CSV import is not working for you. Another thing that you could do is to send me an email. I'm sending you an email now with the CSV file to check. And like this, I would be able to check if something is going on with the actual algorithm that is not working. Tom Diaz was agreeing with Google Scholar. Yeah, I mean, if it was possible, the only way to do now is to scrape them, but it's illegal, and we could only include it into the open source product maybe, so people do it on their own, and then perhaps import the graphs into the cloud version for more in-depth analysis. But I would rather find some more interesting search engine that provides API access. Can you consume some Scopus API to graph topic by domain and source reviews with their scoring? Marjorie, I don't know what Scopus API is, so maybe you can clarify it a little bit, what kind of API it is and what it proposes. But I'm going to write it down and research on that later. PubMed, Nikolaus is saying. Okay, I think, isn't it only one subject? Because I'm not sure if it's just medical papers or not. But it could definitely be included at least to research that aspect. About the function you demonstrated earlier in this session, the one that can show how topics evolve chronologically. Do you know when it will be made available? Also, is it possible to specify a customized time frame rather than just pass a few hours, making it 5 days, 10 days, and so on? So this will be made available, I think, in the next 3 or 4 days, that you will be able to scroll like that and see how the graph evolves. In fact, it's already available. If you click here, you'll see how the graph evolves, but it doesn't recalculate the size of the nodes. So what I just showed before was that every time you scroll, it recalculates also the whole statistics for the graph, including the whole analytics panel. And to answer the question whether you will be able to customize time frame, yes, maybe not at the first rollout, but it's going to come. I'm thinking about 2-3 weeks maximum. We will have this like a little slider that allows you to choose what's the time frame you want to explore. And also what I want to add is in the trends panel that you can see actually what happens to the topics in the graph dynamically. So if you have any requests, ideas that you would like to have about this functionality, maybe you want something specific from it, I'm sending you our new support portal as a response, and you can submit it on the forum there in the user requested features. The features that will get most votes will go up in the priority queue. So please get back with your suggestions. Like this, we know what to focus on. Julio is asking, could I choose hashtag and country in Twitter? So you can choose the hashtag, Julio, but the country, not yet. Going to add this also within the next month, I think. Majari is writing about LTBS, Scopus search engine and databases. Okay, I'm going to look into it in more detail. Let's exchange emails. So maybe send me yours because I don't have yours now. And then we can follow up on that and see how it could be implemented. Now I'm going to go back to the questions that people had when they signed up for this seminar. So we stopped at the COVID questions. Let's explore a little bit more before we finish. I will see what else people wanted to explore using the tool. In the meanwhile, I also want to show you that we have this new bigram expert feature here. So this is very interesting because it shows you the main connections between terms that exist in the discourse. So if we take this network of tweets on coronavirus and vaccines, you see you don't have so much of the graphical guide here, but there is quite a lot here. So if you click on graphical guide, see that people are speaking about graphical guides quite a lot, or maybe there was some trendy topic on the graphical guide on a specific one. So you can click on that and see that there was one article that became quite popular recently. And this we can discover using this feature called Top Relations in Trends, which basically calculates bigrams, and you can download them as a CSV file for later exploration. Also clinical trial, scam aware, so this is probably something a bit negative. Fake cures of vaccines, okay. Safety, so people are concerned about safety and so on. So this is an interesting new feature that you might be curious to explore. Maybe I'm going to show also one more new feature. So one thing is when you click on the Insight panel, you can reveal the structural gap, the two parts of the content which are not very well connected but could be. Automatically tells you which two statements contain the highest concentration of them. When you read them both, you might think of how could they be connected, and this is supposed to generate new ideas, hopefully. Another new field here is the Latent narrative shifters. Everything is explained here if you click on the question mark, but basically what it looks for are the words that are not so frequent in this discourse, but that have a high measure of influence on the graph. And what that normally means, like you see here, is that it's informational brokers. So Oxford is not used so much in this discourse. However, it's used with such influential terms, and it's connecting such a diverse range of topics that are quite influential that it becomes important, that maybe it proposes a new idea. So it's exactly the nodes that bridge those structural gaps. And here we can read more about Oxford. So Oxford vaccine trial, but that was like a fake news repo. Okay, so there was some kind of connection about this Oxford vaccine and fake news, and this is something that people are talking about. Then if we click on the next word, so for instance, oversight, we actually have two similar tweets here because we imported coronavirus vaccines and COVID vaccines. And this is why everything is double, because probably Twitter used some of the same tweets to get this information. If we click on exploit, then we can find some interesting connections between relevant subjects here. So this can be quite interesting to explore also, let's say, if you have Google search results, for instance. Where was that graph? I think here. No, that was Twitter. If we go to Google search results. Yes, this was about text analytics. We can see again all the most important stuff here, but if we go into the insight panel, we can look at the structural gap. You see it selects two communities which are almost on the opposite sides of each other, so it could be interesting to connect them both. But the latent narrative shifters are the informational brokers. So what nodes could be interesting that are connecting important stuff together but are not so relevant themselves. Computational is one of those words, for instance. MATLAB also, the software. So the software was not mentioned so frequently in the search results. However, it was mentioned with other important terms, and this is why it shows up here. Let us continue with the other stuff. So how do you compare InfraNodus to Synaptica, Pool Party, or Intelligence API? To be honest, I'm ashamed to say that I don't know about any of those products, at least not off the top of my head. I'm going to look into them, and then I can tell you what I think about them and how it compares. Maybe you can elaborate in the meanwhile while we look at other cases what the software is about, and I can explain you what the differences are. I will go back into more questions from the people who submitted. So Massimo, who joined the webinar, he asked about word networks analysis, but I think we covered that subject. Vladimir Alexic was asking about tags related to immigration and Flickr. So basically, in order to analyze Flickr, you would need to find some tool that would import the tags from Twitter as a CSV table, and then go into the applications, advanced import, and choose that file here and import the data like that. I think this would be the easiest. Another way is just to get that file, open it, and copy the whole column with the tags that you're interested in, maybe sort them by geographical location, and visualize them in a graph. By the way, soon it will be possible to also add categories to your graph. So for example, you will be looking, let's say you have a graph of the Flickr posts that have certain tags in them. What you will be able to do, I will show actually using the example of something that is already working a little bit in that way. So you will be able to filter the actual graphs, and you will be able to say like, okay, show me the Flickr posts that were made only in the US, for instance. You click here, it only shows you the tags used in the US, or only the tags in England. So you will be able to have this kind of feature that allows you to select the categories. This is going to be implemented. David is saying these are all text analysis platforms, very expensive, don't raise your prices. Sure, thank you for this. I will look into them and see how they work. Definitely not going to raise any prices. We always experiment with prices, and we saw that the current prices are something that people are happy to pay. And not more, and for us it's also good like that because it allows us to work on the software. So it's a win-win for everyone. We're not in this business to get rich, just to have fun and to be able to do research and to share it with others. Analyzing student comments, someone is asking, or questions. So again, for this, what would be quite useful is the CSV import feature. Again, you would save your comments in a CSV file, or just, open an Excel file. I would open Excel and show you how it works. I just don't want to accidentally show some data which doesn't belong to us. So I'm just going to make sure it doesn't open in this frame, and then I can demonstrate to you how you can take any data from Excel. Okay, it doesn't open because I'm sharing the screen. But basically, maybe I can demonstrate to you something here, like, I don't know, Excel table or something. Let's see if there is like an existing table somewhere. No. Basically what you would do, you would just go into the table, select the whole column or some rows, and then copy and paste them here, like that. And it would visualize automatically every row is like a statement, and every co-occurrence is the connection between them. So you can use it like that, or you can save your data as a CSV file and then import it using the import feature here on the apps page, this one. I'm gonna read more questions. And we will be finishing soon, so if you have any questions, please write them in. Okay, let's explore this. For example, women in gaming. Tony is asking discrimination online. Okay, so for this you would maybe need to provide a little bit more precise list of sources that you would like to use, because we could do the same for Google and other stuff. But for instance, it could be interesting to combine an RSS feed from specialized publications, which would then filter words by certain queries. So here actually you can create your own feed. If you click here, it opens a third-party service that allows you to make a combination of different RSS feeds and to combine them into one, which you could then use to get all the data you need, and then you could use this to filter it by certain topic and basically see what's going on with the discourse of women in gaming. Maybe it's interesting to show what you can how you can compare different things together. So I will use this example because it can be quite interesting. Let's say that we make one search on women in gaming, and then we will see what discourse exists out there on that subject using Google search results. So video industry, Xbox, let's get rid of these months, we don't need them. There is an account on Twitter. Okay, so we get an overview of this, and then what we can do is to make another import on Google, but this time it's going to be with men in gaming. And you were asking about discrimination, so an interesting thing could be to compare the two graphs and to see what people talk about when they talk about men in gaming that they don't talk about when they talk about women in gaming. And this you do by selecting one graph. So I'm in the men's graph, and I click on this icon that shows me the difference between the two graphs. Then I click on the other one here, on the women one. And then if I go here, difference, additional minus current, and into the inside panel, I see that, okay, what exists in the graph with men that doesn't exist in the graph of women. So what people talk about when they talk about men in gaming that they don't talk about when they talk about women in gaming. Okay, young men. So they talk about young, they don't talk about young women. So this is a sort of discrimination, perhaps. Also Asian consumers. They talk about Asian consumers, but in relation to men, not to women. Then we can also reverse the context, so we can see if we click this button here, what people talk about when they talk about women that they don't talk about when they talk about men. And here we see it's quite tribal gaming symposium. Okay, that's interesting. Then some initiatives, industry. So some kind of more general things maybe about the industry, but also quite specific stuff. So this would be the workflow for you to compare different discourses together. You can make more searches like that and see, you know, how different discourses are different, and maybe detect some interesting insights from there. Let's go further. Do I have any new questions? No? Okay, I'm just going to read. Okay. Can you scroll a list of URL and scrap the text? Jean-Baptiste in gold is asking. Yes, you can do this. You can use this app here, the Wikipedia article or any URL page. So you can choose any other page, put your URL there, and if it's not protected in some high-tech way, it's going to extract the text from this page and visualize it as a graph. Thank you, David. Tony is asking, or he's just saying, thank you very much. It was very useful for my research. Thank you, Tony. Let's look. Oh yeah, Tony was the one who was asking about women. Okay, we looked through this. I'm just looking through the questions that I received with the webinar registrations, something interesting. So Roger Moody, I don't know if you're still there. Please let me know if you are, because you were asking about nonlinear dynamics, making the invisible visible. If you're still there, let me know and we can explore the subject. Moritz was asking about managing files, file collections, and their connections. Right, so some kind of categorization engine that you could use to look into different files and how they're related. This is not yet possible to do, but if you click here on See All Graphs, InfraNodus shows you how all of your graphs are connected together and through which times. Sometimes it takes a while to load if you added a lot of information, but here it gives you a nice visual overview of how your different graphs and documents are related. So for example, you see here we have coronavirus. All this stuff, they were probably about coronavirus, some imports of tweets and so on. Then here we have a lot about text data analysis. These were the stuff that we were importing on text analysis from Google and so on. These are some sideways one, and if you double click on that, then you go into the actual graph, and this was on women gaming. By the way, another interesting feature that is not so visible is if you double click on a node, it's going to load the graphs that contain this node in the system. So it's going to take a while, but then it will show you if there is any other graphs apart from this one, which are connected to this term. And this can be also interesting for research. I will go and see more questions. Marjorie Meunier. Interview text analytics in a sociology study to understand organizational culture. Absolutely, you would just use this app here. In fact, you can also use speech to graph, so you can even record the interview and have it visualized as a network. But you can also just use this, you know, type everything in or import a text file here and visualize the interview as a graph. You could also make two graphs, one with the person who is interviewing, the interviewer, and the interviewee, to see what is the relation between the two graphs that they propose and how they interact together. Okay, just looking through more clean water for hand washing from Ben Smith, but we already explored quite a lot of stuff on COVID. Let's see, topic extraction, Massimo was asking, we looked into that, and analysis political discourse on social media. I don't know if Patrick is still there. And thank you, Vladimir, also for your message. Basically, maybe for the political one as the last demonstration, what I like to do with this tool is to compare the evolution of discourse in time. And this is why this dynamic graph feature will be quite useful later. What can be interesting to do is, for example, let's say that we want to compare the governmental response to coronavirus in different countries. Every president or a prime minister came out and gave a speech. Probably a transcript of it is available. So what we could do is to make a graph of each speech and see how it evolved in time. What were the main topics, how they changed over time, and you know, what were the new prominent ideas that came in, what were the influential terms, how they changed, and also compare the two graphs together, just like I showed in the previous example. So this would be one way to do. Another way is to, of course, use the Twitter analysis tool to see what people are talking about a certain political candidate. And then you can also use SEO app or the Google app to find out what people are interested in relation to the agenda of the politician. So that would be the direction to go in. But if you want, you can write to me and we can explore this in more detail. So I guess I'm going to end here. Thank you very much to everyone. I'm leaving my email here in the chat, in the main chat, and also the link to our new support portal where you can ask questions and submit your ideas, feature requests, and everything else. Please feel free to do that. And thank you very much for joining. I think we will do one shorter one now every week. And if you have any suggestions for what you would like to explore, let me know. Thank you very much for your time, for joining, and I hope you have a good day. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.